It's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. So today's webinar explores the ephemeral nature of musical events and venues. And we're getting 3 projects for the price of 1 today. We'll be hearing about 3 projects concerned with the challenges of capturing the intangible elements of high street music venues, which have become increasingly transient. So we'll be hearing about the Intermuse project, Our Place DIY Digital Archiving Toolkit, and the Willow Community Digital Archive. So our speaker today will be Rachel Cowgill, who is Professor of Music at the University of York, where she's also Associate Dean for Research and Director of the Humanities Research Centre. She's a cultural historical musicologist who has published widely on British music and music cultures, Mozart and opera studies, and musical ephemera and digital musicologies. She is part of a project team. We also have on the call and joining us for the discussion later, Victoria Hoyle, who is Senior Lecturer in Public History and Director of the Institute for Public Understanding of the Past at the University of York. Prior to this, Victoria's contribution to the project draws on her previous professional experience as an archivist with Explore York Libraries and Archives. She became City Archivist in 2013. Her research explores the relationship between communities, archives, institutions, and histories, as reflected in her recent book, The Remaking of Archival Values. We also have 2 other members of the project team who are unable to join us. David Bainbridge, who is, I'm told, asleep because he is in New Zealand at the University of Waikato, where he directs the New Zealand Digital Library Research Project and produces the open source Greenstone Digital Library software. And Alan Dix, who is also unavailable to join us today, not I gather because he's asleep. He is Professorial Fellow at Cardiff Metropolitan University and Emeritus Professor at Swansea University. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Rachel to present now on the 3 projects covering the Internet of Musical Events.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a wonderful introduction. I'm very grateful, and it's a lovely opportunity for me to share some of the material that I've been working on for a couple of years now with colleagues, as you've heard, with you, because it seems to, this collection project seems to address really neatly some of the key issues that are highlighted in this seminar series. So I've kind of put the title up there, Co-Designing for Participation, Inclusion and the Ephemeral in 3 Community Digital Archiving Projects. And just to sort of take you through some of the connections there, I'm hoping they'll become apparent as I go through, but just to emphasize that the elements of inclusivity here are working with ephemera, which of course in the field of music and entertainment studies to do with those elements of print and material culture that relate to a specific moment where they're all important, and then of course they become kind of yesterday's news. But many collections of ephemera have survived, often in dusty corners of archives, where librarians and archivists don't always know what to do with them, what their value is, or recognise how to catalogue them, because they are complex and highly intricate sources. And some of the work that I've been doing with the Intermuse project particularly has been engaging with that nature of ephemerality and how we can work with this material using digital tools. So why work with ephemera? Why work in this inclusive way that brings ephemera into the source circle, if you like, for talking about music and musical culture? Well, it's enormously rich and exciting material that you can gather from ephemeral sources, and it can lead to discoveries that can decenter and off-center your narratives, the traditional narratives of Paris, London, New York as the center for musical culture can be really set in a fascinating context, new perspectives and new narratives coming in, and unexpected discoveries and connections. The serendipity that emerges through this kind of work is really exciting. Also, in the course of the discussion of the Willow Archive, I'll be talking about some of our participatory methods and co-creation, the idea of using co-creative methods to create an inclusive, a community and an all-embracing digital archive to commemorate and to reinvigorate shared memories. Okay, so the first project I want to talk about was an AHRC funded project. It's the Internet of Musical Events, Digital Scholarship Community and the Archiving of Performance. And we got funding from the AHRC under the US, UK, New Directions for Digital Scholarship in Cultural Organisations schemes that was just a few years ago. And it allowed me to bring together a fabulous group of colleagues and institutions from both sides of the Atlantic. Here we all are. We have on the USA side of things some superb musicologists, computer science people. We have our director of marketing from the Krannert Center, Performing Arts Center at Illinois, University of Illinois. So that's our group from the US. And on the other side of the Atlantic here, Alan Dix from Human Computer Interaction, Rupert Ridgewell from the British Library, myself. We have some wonderful research assistants, Charlotte, and also Frankie Perry and Joseph Goldstein, all of whom were engaged as research doctoral and postdoctoral researchers on this project. And right in the middle there is David Bainbridge, who has been creating a digital archive from the Greenstone software that he has been so essential in developing at the University of Waikato. And we're going to be talking more about that later on. Okay, so ephemeral musical sources. Well, music in itself is ephemeral, isn't it? I mean, it disappears into thin air, and in many ways that ephemerality and that celebration of the moment is part of its affective importance and effective significance for us. But as I've said, ephemeral sources tend to be marginalized when we're looking at music historically and culturally, yet it provides considerable richness. Concert programs in particular have been problematic. They're incredibly dense, highly formulaic sources that on the micro level reflect characteristic traditions or rituals or expectations that audiences have in a particular place, and that could be a venue or a particular community. The politics between classes and between parts of a town or community, all of that can play out in the way local musical concert programs can be interpreted and understood. And yet on the macro level, it tells us important material and important things about bigger questions concerning longer term structural change and repertorial change over time, where certain works or certain repertoires or certain composers become canonized through various kind of processes. We could talk about structural and cultural processes, and others sort of become less significant and marginalized and fade from view. So these are really, really valuable and important areas of source work, and shed a lot of new light and give a lot of potential for our deepened understanding of what's happening in musical culture through time in particular places. So this has been the motivation for the Internet of Musical Events, which is the first project I'm going to talk about, or Intermuse to its friends. It's a highly interdisciplinary and participatory collaboration between musicologists, as I've said, computer scientists, members of the public, members of concert societies, musicians, concert providers themselves, and archivists and librarians, investigating the challenges and potential rewards that we have when we work with ephemera. And as I've said, it's very much a co-created digital archive that brings the societies into dialogue with their own archives and works with their own knowledge that helps to shape and make decisions about what's significant and what's presented and how things are organized within the archive. So within Intermuse, we have basically created sub-projects, one based in the UK and one based in the US, but we're all working on both of those. It's not a sort of two teams under one heading. It's much more mixed and collaborative. The first one focuses on the British Music Society, which I'll talk about in a moment, and that's in the UK. And the US is a study looking at Igor Stravinsky and his relationship with the School of Music at the University of Urbana-Champaign. And that's largely through his son, Sulima Stravinsky, who was based there. And there's some untold stories there that have been emerging through the archive in Technicolor, which I'll share with you. So, first of all, a bit about the British Music Society. This was founded in 1918 in the closing months of the First World War by a man called Arthur Eaglefield Hull, who was a PhD from Oxford, a musician, an organist, a composer and an arranger and a kind of musical animateur. And his idea was to try and use music to restore cultural international exchange, those links and exchange routes that had broken down, had been thriving in the run up to the First World War, but had since broken down. He was also keen to empower amateurs as concert providers and celebrate what they brought to the whole business of performance and fostering of musical talent through music education and opening up of musical culture to a wider public. He was very keen on providing opportunities to all parts of society, to children, bringing music libraries into schools and creating clubs for musical societies based in towns and cities across the UK under the heading of the British Music Society to put on music and to celebrate what was going on in their towns and in their communities and to exchange new music with the continent and vice versa. So we've been working in this principally with three musical societies who found their origins back in 1918 with the British founding of the British Music Society and are still going today. But actually the British Music Society itself wound up in the 1930s, but such was the kind of build-up of energy and activity that it kind of continued on in these particular centres and became a kind of music society of its own, though in many cases kind of preserving that BMS identity with it. So the ephemera and the material that are gathered around this organisation is immense. These are, for example, documents that record the prospectus that was put out at various points to gather subscribers and support. As you can see, there's a kind of propaganda element to it. There's a committee of management. There's an office in London, which is considered sort of head office, and missives and materials, including scores and recommendations, were issued from there with the purpose of establishing those key elements of a new reinvigorated post-war musical culture. Educational elements to that as well. So, and some of the key people involved in this and that were supporting it were key musical figures of the day, including Edward J. Dent, for example, who was at the University of Cambridge, and a number of other academics and musicians. So what sort of materials then start to come in more broadly into a digital archive or discussion of how ephemera sheds light on musical activities and moments of musical activity over time? Well, collections include, for example, season brochures, as well as programmes, reviews. We get recordings, obviously, in the early 20th century, not much before that, but certainly that becomes a key audio-visual element that we can bring into triangulation with these other text-based sources. Photographs, correspondence, administrative and financial records, scores, printed and manuscript, many of which in different editions and different versions have important variants. And that again can sometimes play out in sort of some relatively independent performance traditions of a particular purpose, a particular version of a piece or a particular approach to its performance in a live setting. So there's diversity among the sources, widely diverse, heterogeneous sources there. And they're held in lots of different types of collections, local library collections, local studies, sometimes in personal archives in the home of people associated with the society, and in individuals' memories, of course, as well. So with the British Music Society project within the Intermuse Digital Archive, this is what we have tried to draw together. We've identified four main document types. The ephemera we've just talked about there. The British Music Society's bulletins. This was a journal that was published by the British Music Society Information Bureau from London and disseminated through all the branches and clubs that were set up as British Music Society organisations or branches within towns and communities across the country. And within a few years, about 25 of those have been established just by pure effort of Arthur Eaglefield Hall himself, and a further 25 would be instated within a few years after that. So it was a really thriving network of information, taste, and also providing an important opportunity for musicians coming back from the First World War, some of whom had been injured, to try and re-establish themselves on a kind of supportive music performance circuit across the country, and also for other forms of activity associated with the societies as well. The British Music Society published annual and congress publications as well, and that's part of our third category. And then this enormous endeavour that Arthur Eaglefield Hall put together as general editor and published in 1924, which was a dictionary of modern music and musicians. Of course, thinking about ephemerality, that term modern immediately kind of causes issues. And you often find copies of this book, which was incredibly popular, for £5 on secondhand bookstore shelves, because it's considered to be highly out of date. But it is an absolute goldmine in terms of understanding what this network was doing, and also how incredibly widely it was networked across the world in different countries within a few years. So briefly, these are the sorts of documents we're talking about. This is an example of the British Music Society York Centre from 1921, Tempest Anderson Hall in what's now the York Museum. And you can see the complexity of this source. A lot of information is expressed in terms of one-to-many, composer, work, piece of work, order within the programme, and then which players are playing which. And a lot of that is conveyed through change of font, positioning on the page, all of those kind of visual cues that you learn to read as you see something in this format over time. So that's the sort of document we're talking about. And if you can see to the right also, there is also very valuable, important material in the advertisements that come with these documents, pitched, of course, to the same people who are buying the tickets and supporting the musicians involved in the activity. Some of these, of course, are annotated. We've got a fine example there. This is actually, we don't know who was writing on this, but the suggestion from the comments is somebody is actually putting together a review as they're listening. You can't really see what they're saying particularly, but in a moment I'll show you what some of those are. This came from the collection at the Royal College of Music, and I'm very grateful to colleagues there for making it available. Within our Intermuse digital archive, these annotations are really important, and we're very keen to capture them. And we have potential for annotating the document of the original kind of programme there, and capturing these kind of pencil annotations as an important aspect of the usage and interaction with that document. So comments include dissonance gets monotonous, for example, here. And there are others that I can't see because they're underneath the window for the Zoom call here, but you can see them, I think, in front of you. The other thing to note is that our computer studies colleagues have developed an app or a feature of the digital archive that enables us to lighten and darken to bring out some of these very light pencil strokes, and that's been a real advantage in working with some of these images. Other resources online come from, for example, family historians. This, for example, is Jeff Kutcher's family archive, which you can see here. This is a celebration of his great nephew, his great uncle, and Samuel Kutcher, who played in the Kutcher Quartet during the 20s and 30s. And you can see through the family the survival of additional materials that we would want to connect and to be able to bring into dialogue with these more text-based kind of documents. And obviously, this is of huge interest to Jeff and his family, what we're doing here with Intermuse. He includes also some wonderful reviews that have come to his attention that he's put on his website. To be able to connect to that, to bring that material together into dialogue, has been one of the things that's been a key objective for our project. Annotations often can relate to last-minute changes. This is a programme, again, Linen Hall Library has provided permission to copy this. This is from the 1979 to 80 Belfast British Music Society. And this is a concert. Two concerts were amended at this time. I think this was a reflection of what was happening politically in 1980 at this time, with incidents happening in the street all through central Belfast. We have a Stroke Through, Dmitry Alexeyev's concert there, and Mitsuko Ishida, a young Mitsuko Ishida, is penciled in there as a last-minute replacement. What a bargain that would have been. I'm sure Alexeyev was a fabulous pianist, but to get Mitsuko Ishida in there would have been a real treat. And then the Fires of London, one could speculate and say this was an unhelpful phrase. It's the title, of course, of the band that Peter Maxwell Davies was playing, but perhaps may have been thought at that time to have been inappropriate to put on a concert programme in that context. So there's just a little bit more about that close up there. So we've been working, all of this is work in progress, but we've been reflecting some of these issues and changes as we've gone through and produced our spreadsheets with the materials that we've been digitising and collecting together and bringing into dialogue with each other within the digital archive itself. British Music Bulletins, this is the journal I mentioned that went out from the Information Bureau from London. As you can see there, it's a very substantial and formal looking document. They were issued monthly, and they continued up to the mid-30s, and they're an absolute goldmine of information about musical culture all over the country at that time. And if we have a look, there are, for example, this is Eaglefield Hull at this time in these early editions is editing. It gets passed to somebody else later on, but he is the key editor at this point. So this is very much under his kind of editorial control. And the sorts of documents there that come through, the articles that are included, are fabulously interesting. So we have these concert programs that have survived in patches in different archives that we're able to bring together, but we're also able to bring them into dialogue with these reports from the different branches of the British Music Society that get published in the BMS bulletin. We also get some unusual to us now articles, such as this one, for example, by Rutland Boughton on Ethel Smythe, which is, I just throw in there just to say that, you know, the canonic figures of that time and the figures who were emerging as new voices on the musical scene, perhaps we wouldn't necessarily recognise in the same terms now, although, of course, Smythe is enjoying quite a renaissance these days. So the Congress publications, here's a programme from the British Music Society Congress, which was a huge event that was held with large-scale concerts. Again, there are chief objectives there, and it's been really interesting to compare the objectives of the Congress with the objectives that were set out in the original prospectus for the BMS. You can start to see different agendas forming and different kind of priorities emerging as personnel change and shift position within the organisation. Back to the Dictionary of Music, Modern Music and Musicians. Again, dictionaries are fantastic, but they're not indexed. So whilst they are organised by entry, you don't know what entries are going to be in there. Additionally, you don't know what other information is going to be included in an entry that perhaps deals with a different person or a different theme. You can see the international contributors there to this incredible operation. And a very distinguished group of editors, including Henry Wood, E.J. Dent, Granville Bantock, Hugh Allen. These are really significant composer academics of the time. So looking at some of the entries within the dictionary, some of these, of course, we can bring in again into a connection with items that appear in concert programmes and also other documents that are in the archive or that we connect to from the archive to bring these things, these different sources into dialogue. We've got an article there, for example, about Marion Ursula Arkwright, signed E.H. This is, again, Eaglefield Hull, and he is putting down material there that he knows personally through his connection with her. And it's interesting to see she's just died at the point this encyclopedia has been published. So this is fresh memory and knowledge being put down on the page here about this significant composer. So if we started to follow the thread from the dictionary through the other sources available to us or that we've been able to include or link to within the archive, here we have, for example, in a list of contemporary composers, Marian Yuzula Arkwright is included there, along with a list of works that are suggested there for local branches of the British Music Society to choose for performance. That York programme I showed you earlier, again, there's a piece by Marian Arkwright, one of those listed in the list I've just shown you. So again, you know, there's this information coming out, these publications coming out, and individual branches and committees are picking up on the hints. We can connect to various other external organisations. For example, IMSLIP, the Petrucci Music Library, which has put together digitised versions of parts, historical scores, and materials that are made available for use and for viewing online. As it happens, there's some material by Marian Arkwright we can connect to. And of course, there are significant record office collections. Here is a page from the Berkshire Record Office, for example. Again, a connection can be drawn there. Scrapbooks have survived in that repository that shed an awful lot of light, not only on her own work, but on her social circles and musical activities in Berkshire at that time. Concert programmes, of course, there's a wonderful resource there, the concertprogrammes.org.uk, and Rupert Ridgewell, who comes from the British Library, is one of the chief curator staff in the music section. He's part of our team, and he was pioneering the promotion of concert programmes as a historical source through this scoping list that was put online a few years ago. At collection level, it provides important information about where some of these programmes may lie. And that, of course, is Wikipedia, where, again, connections can be drawn. Okay, so I'm just going to scoot forward a few pages. Again, there's an example there of William Baines, who died around the same time as Arkwright, an important burgeoning young composer who was promoted very strongly by the British Music Society and by Hull specifically. We can connect there between some of the material that we've uncovered and that we've included in the archive and some of the materials, the manuscript diaries and the compositions that have survived in manuscript at the British Library. Thread 3, Elizabeth Lutyens, again, an important female composer, very significant, who composed a quartet movement that was first performed in a British Music Society of York concert. And again, there are connections we can form there with some of her papers and materials, correspondence with members of staff at University of York, where she was in residence for a while, talking about this particular piece. Okay, so here I have two links. One would show you the Intermuse Digital Archive itself. We've got two different versions of the archive. We were having some problems accessing the link earlier, so at this point, I'm not sure whether this is going to lead to anything helpful. Can anyone see that at all?
No, Rachel, we're still seeing your slide.
Okay, we might have to leave that till later then. Okay, so that's basically where we are with the Intermuse Digital Archive, working very closely with societies and their collections, and encouraging a sort of annotation with memories from members of the British Music Society committees and things like that, where we can actually bring oral history and triangulate that with the messages and stories and information that are coming through the written sources that we're able to connect with. So I want to move on to Stravinsky and Urbana just briefly. This is the project that's based within Intermuse at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So these are my colleagues, Stephen Downey and Michael Twydale and Christina Bashford and Joseph Goldstein, particularly, who's been doing a lot of work on this. This explores the little-known connection between Stravinsky and the University of Illinois School of Music through his son, Sulima Stravinsky. And I'm hoping that you might be able to hear some of this material, which comes from Joseph, who's been working on this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph Goldstein. It's good to be here. This is the, well, these are the slides that discuss a little bit more about Stravinsky and Urbana as a specific case study. So there is a little-known connection between Igor Stravinsky and the university. The connection with Sulima It's more at the edge of memory as opposed to little known, since he did teach there for 28 years. But Sulema and Igor were present at a performance in 1949 called the Festival of Contemporary Arts. They were actually the feature performers performing an all-Stravinsky concert. Igor returned along with Sulema in 1950.
Yep.
And then Igor returned one final time in 1963. Sulema made such a good impression that he was hired in 1950 and he remained at the university. Now, on the bottom left, we can see a picture which shows Igor and Sulema talking to a couple students. It's the sort of picture that makes you think, man, if only someone had a cell phone to record what they were hearing and saying and seeing. Well, we kind of do. Through the usage of ephemera and marginalized sources, we can piece together a lot of things at the margins that end up creating a much more cohesive picture. So again, with sort of the images here as an example, there's an image of a rehearsal, there's a newspaper clipping with more information on the rehearsal, and sometimes you also grab a little bit of audio, such as this. I wanted to get a little bit of the oboe in there. It's a pretty solid performance. I like to think it compares favorably to the 1953 Cleveland Orchestra performance, but that might be just a little bit of school bias showing. In any event, Stravinsky was very pleased with the performance, writing to Bob Kraft in March of 1949, "Oh Bob, two wonderful concerts, Urbana," which was published in the Musical Quarterly as part of Robert Kraft's letters and correspondence. Stravinsky was pleased, and that's in large part because, well, contrary to the 1, 2, 3, 4 implication of the picture on the newspaper clipping, a good number of the performers were actually faculty, which, although we can't show it today, is further specified through several documents on how Stravinsky wanted the individual instruments laid out for the performance. All of these little bits of ephemera tie in from the edges to create a bigger picture in the middle, so to speak. But managing that information is quite tricky, in large part because it's often a variety of different sources, a variety of different formats, and cannot all be stored in the same way. This is part of where having a really sort of solid digital archive can be extraordinarily helpful, both in just figuring out where material is, but also bridging more connections and cultivating serendipity between the different items. And as an example here, that's sort of the information we had on one performance, 1949. There was more for the performances in 1966, 1969, 1972, and way beyond that feature just one piece, the one we heard, Pulcinella.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joseph. So I've just included some of these items here in case we couldn't see them. So this is the, I probably can't see this, I guess. Can you see me going into the archive? Probably not by the sound of it.
No, we can't. We can see
Okay.
your screenshot, Rachel.
All right. Okay. Well, this is the outside of the archive. And what we've done within that, as you can see, is we have document types. So we have gathered together these sources in different groupings by type, by archived location, so at the Cranach Centre or at the School of Music, and also by the nature of the material. And the connections between the two form the more you work as you work with those. More about that in a moment. One of the things that Joseph has done as well is to create a timeline, entering in at each point the links to particular items. So this is kind of, into the workshop really, starting to establish the timeline, because the key thing, particularly with Pulcinella at this time, is that it's a very early performance of this piece. And in some ways it's still forming. And so we get a bit of a window on that process in this moment where Stravinsky is working with Sulema at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So this is encouraging us to sort of think with a step backwards, really, at what's going on when we're starting to work in this way. From a technical standpoint, and here I'm deferring very much to my colleagues Stephen and Michael and Alan, from a and David, of course. From a technical perspective, what we're doing with these sources as we're bringing them into connection and association with each other and being able to sort of work and toggle and compare and connect them, is that we're establishing a sort of a set of associations which is both informing our knowledge and understanding as scholars and returning that in the way that the metadata is being enriched around each of these items, and the ones that are becoming significant in that dialogue become quite prominent and well kind of embellished in terms of the additional annotations and links we can make. So from a technical point of view, that's what's happening. And because what David does within Greenstone is basically to approach this sort of cloud-based digital library kind of method, what he's doing there is kind of moving away from the sort of shared drive approach where everything is put in a single folder in a sort of hierarchy. It gives us much more fluidity, and the sources are able to sort of develop in their connections as our understanding improves and vice versa. It's kind of reiterative, reciprocal, that's what it is. So effectively then, that's what's happening from a technical point of view. And in terms of scholarship, as we get deeper in our understanding of the materials we're looking at, these new understandings of their structural relationships and epistemological relationships and the metadata building around them, in turn informs how the digital library is developing around certain clusters and key sets of sources. So that's something that we're developing at the moment. This is very much a kind of ongoing discussion. So at this point, Stravinsky and Urbana is giving us an opportunity to explore that with a set of related documents within the archive that are related thematically, as opposed to what's happening with the British Music Society, which is kind of exploring things institutionally through that particular organisation. And we're going to be looking at an authoring environment later on that really just sort of explores that iterative process more clearly and looks at it in heart focus. So I want to just sort of focus a little bit more in the last section on music's ephemerality in relation to how voices come and go through its kind of transience. Music envoices people at particular times and moments, and that kind of carries huge effective weight. But because of its ephemerality, that kind of can disappear. And basically the result of that is that we have the memories that people are left with, but very little kind of tangible trace on the historical record of what has happened through that musical event. And I want to just take that through into the Willow Community Digital Archive, which is another digital archive project we've been working with. And this is where Victoria, who's joined us today, is working with us. Hello, is working with us on the project. Victoria, of course, very inspiring archivist historian. I've learned a lot from conversations with her on this and around the methods associated with co-creating digital archives, and we put them, I think, to good use here. It certainly feels very exciting. David obviously is there too. Vicky Fong, her significance will come in a bit later, and David Thomas, she's working with on this too in their strategic design company, Tom Fong. Say more about that later. And Alan, of course, is working with us on this too. So a few kind of key moments I'm just going to draw out there. The context, sort of themes around liminality and transience, how you reconnect and recollect memories once a venue or a kind of particularly important point in people's memories and musical cultural life disappears. And of course, music venues are lamentably folding as we speak across the country. The music venue industry and the music entertainment industry around particularly grassroots venues is a very, very challenging one at the moment, and there's a lot of important activism happening around that to emphasize the cultural heritage and cultural importance of music venues to communities through the decades. Yeah, and then I'll bring things to a conclusion there. So what was and what is the Willow Community Digital Archive? Well, it emerged from the Street Life project. This was a high street regeneration project that was supported by UK government levelling up funding through the Community Renewal Fund, and also some Hive funding for a period of 18 months, all in all. And we set up a project through a pop-up that was established in York's city centre high street, and that's Coney Street, a very important historic route from one side of the city to another, and also particularly a few decades ago, a really significant, all-important high street retail area. In recent years, of course, like many UK high streets, it has been in less buoyant state, and one of the reasons we highlighted Coney Street for this funding, for this project, was not only its wealth of history, but also the fact that it needed a change of direction. It needed some new, fresh perspectives in order to help a recovery process take place, particularly after the pandemic. So we've been working with partners and members of the community, and in particular from our pop-up, we were able to connect with people who were just going about their daily business along Coney Street and could come into the hub, we called it, and could share their memories of the street, what they like about the street, what they don't like about the street, all as part of a kind of preparation for receipt of some development plans for the whole area of the Riverside in York, which is still very much ongoing. So if you want to know more about the Street Life project, the website is there. There's your URL. And you'll find under projects a section on the Willow Community Digital Archive, which will tell you more than I'm able to tell you today. But I'm just going to focus in on the archive itself and what we did and how we did it. So there's a bit of information there about the decline of music venues in the UK. And why is this relevant? Well, one of the things that we were talking to people about in the early stages of the project was what they remember doing in Coney Street. Shopping, yes. Drinking, yes. Tea, coffee, also at the pubs. But one of the most vibrant groups of memories came from members of the public who emotionally and passionately remembered time they had spent in a place called the Willow. And this was a really important centre for York social life from 1973 to its sudden closure in 2015. It was actually a first floor restaurant. It was set up by a British Chinese family, the Fong family. And in 1973, it was turned into quite a well-to-do Cantonese restaurant that always from the beginning had some live music and then had DJs and disco alongside the Cantonese food. And then by 2008, it was gradually all about the disco, more and more all about the disco. And in the last 15 years or so of its existence, it was purely a nightclub, as you can see in that picture. It is now no longer. It is an empty space. It's owned by a bakery and was in the process of being renovated, and then the builders basically walked off site as the pandemic happened, and it had pretty much been forgotten. We were the first people to go in, I think, for several years in 2023 when we were able to take this footage. So this was our hub. We put in lots of material there about the industries of the past on Coney Street, on the printing industry, on the music publishing and musical performance elements of the street, and lots of material in there discovering the past buildings, past communities that had lived, worked and played there down through the centuries. And all of that was laid on free, along with creative opportunities, creative workshops, and memory work, such as the project we did around the Willow. As you can see, it was an old clothes shop, the Dorothy Perkins shop, that many people remembered, as well as the Willow. So this is our archive. We have gathered together through conversations and through meets at the hub with people who remember the Willow, anecdotes, memories, photographs, artifacts, documents, And it is obviously somewhere where clients and punters who went to the Willow have filled the space with their memorabilia and their kind of photographs and memories, and all of that has come together. But in addition, I've been working very closely with Tom Fong, Vicky Fong and David Thomas. And Vicky Fong is the daughter of the two proprietors, the co-proprietors of the Willow. So Tommy Fong and Sue May Fong, who owned it from 1973 right the way up to 2015 and had three daughters. And Vicky basically grew up in the Willow. And there's a lot of family memorabilia now in the archive as well, which is tremendous because that fleshes it out. And from employees at the venue as well. Including DJs. So these are the ways that we use to build up the material in the archive, combining virtual connections and virtual activities with in-person meets, with COVID regulations still kind of haunting us a little bit in those early years. And through that iterative in-person, digital, commenting on the digital, conversations in person, people bringing things in, exhibitions of art associated with the Willow and inspired by the Willow. You see the Love It or Hate It exhibition there. Much of it, of course, capturing some of the images that Vicky Fong herself produced when she was growing up in the Willow, because a lot of her early cartoons and artwork were on the walls and associated very much with that space, including the famous Love It or Hate It, which was a take on the Marmite slogan, of course, which became quite a logo on T-shirts, etc., for staff and for customers. So this is David talking a little bit more about how he's gone about
Hi, my name is David Bainbridge. I'm from the University of Waikato in New Zealand, and in this segment of the talk, I'll be describing Greenstone. So Waikato is where the Greenstone Digital Library software is produced, and I was already working with Rachel and her team on the Intermuse project. Some of you may be familiar with that work from former DLFM conferences. And so the obvious question really came up of what would the Willow Community Digital Archive look like if it was built out of Greenstone. So Greenstone, it's a general purpose open source digital library software toolkit. And I was trying to find some additional words to describe what software encapsulates, and I thought, well, it's a bit easier, just have a photo of an example collection. So here is a fairly standard deployment of Greenstone. This is New Pepper. This is digitized historic newspapers in the Maori language, and there's a Greenstone digital library collection built around that. So features I'd like to sort of highlight because they become relevant for what we're going to see in the Willow project is that there is your searching area, and you can customize and choose what you search by. And if I was to click into the tabs here, series and dates, I can browse the collection. So searching and browsing is represented here, but it's represented in a configurable way. So you can choose based on your content what you're forming in your digital library. And there's also a lot of control around the visual appearance. So this is in fact, not the homepage of the New Pepper Maori newspaper collection. It also demonstrates the multiple language user interface aspect of the work. So the default for this collection is Maori, and then you can change to English if you would like to. So just to highlight the areas of the software architecture that we're going to be using in doing the digital community archive, the Willow Digital Community Archive, then we're going to talk a little bit about on the next slide how you configure it to deal with different document types. So there's a processing pipeline for that. Then we were just talking about how you can control how you search and how you browse in the New Pepper collection. You'll see that again in the demo for the Willow, what the different choices that have been made there are, and also again the visual appearance of the Willow Community Digital Archive. Strikingly different to the Greenstone one I showed you with the default settings. This is being developed through a combination of cascading style sheets, JavaScript, and our configuration module that we've based around a web technology called XSLT, Extensible Style Sheet Transformations. So yeah, the starting point for any new digital library, digital archive project that you're looking to develop with Greenstone is thinking about the document formats that you have. And the diagram here is to try and help you understand how you configure a pipeline for document processing. So we have a list of file types typically that you provide. The directory plugin, when it recognizes it as a directory, it opens it up and tips the content of those files into the pipeline again. So new content, new files go down. And basically, if you're a document, you head down the pipeline until one of the plugins says, I know how to process you, and I know how to get the text, the metadata, and combine it all and get it into the digital library. Okay, so occasionally, you can have a document format. If it's not handled by the plugins, it gets down to the end of the pipeline and a warning is generated. So we took that part of Greenstone and matched it to the document content that the Willow project had been developing. Greenstone has over 30 plugins to choose from, and you can further tail how they behave through options that are provided. So Rachel's team, there were Excel spreadsheets, there were Word documents, PDFs, photos. So well covered by the existing set of plugins that we had. So that pipeline that we were just looking at in the larger overall building process of a digital library is in fact just this area here. So you have all your amassed documents that they're kind of typically messy. They can be in any sort of folder structure. And through the pipeline process, we convert them into a more canonical form, one folder per document. And then a second phase of ingest happens where you form the search indexes and the browsing classifiers, which goes through here. And then the final layer is the presentation. So at this point, I'm going to hand back to Rachel, who will give the demo of the built digital library collection using Greenstone for the Willow.
Okay, so that may be more challenging. These are just some of the images that we had there, if you didn't get to see them. So this is the core. Can you see that pop out there? Or are you still on my basic slide? No, okay.
We're still on the slide, Rachel. Just to let you know, we're just coming up to 3 o'clock, and we've got some fantastic questions in the chat.
Okay, brilliant.
We can run on a little bit beyond 3, I think.
Okay. Well, I mean, the link is there, so people can play with the archive, at a later point. I will just move us through to. There's an additional bit of material here from David talking about the experimentation we did with the AI as a way of bringing people into the archive through curiosity by playing with the AI, which had been taught and informed by the materials ring-fenced from everything else that's out there in AI and ChatGPT, ring-fenced from all of that, but gathered together from the materials within the archive itself. And David talks about how he trained experimented with training the ChatGPT bot to work in producing narratives that people then had their imagination sparked by, or at any rate, caused a conversation to happen among visitors to the archive. A key part of the archive is that people are able to comment. They're able to upload their materials, but also comment on others. And this whole development of the archive has been done in partnership with York Explore, and massively so in partnership with Tom Fong, as I've said, with Vicky Fong, who has been working very closely with us on the design and population of the archive. After 2 years or so of it being online and as a sort of open archive, we will be going into discussion and development with York Explore, so that it becomes, that's the archives, City Archives, so that it becomes a resource that can be placed on their Preservica account and available in their permanent digital platforms as part of their collections, which obviously is wonderful. Okay, so these are comments here. So this is a little example there of what happens when you put in a query into the Willow Sage, which is our version of ChatGPT. And as you can see, at this point, when we're putting this together, there were some rudimentary references that came out in the way it responded to our questions that actually did operate a little bit like footnotes that referred you to particular documents within the archive. But that's kind of it's gone through different forms since then, and sometimes it does that, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it refers everything to a single document, so it's not terribly consistent. Okay. So, looking at this, looking at what we've been able to do, I'd love to be able to show you the videos. There are 6 trailer videos that we put together with Vicky and David of Tom Fong, and they are 3 minutes or so each. 6 of them, you can see one of them in the link I put into the chat earlier. And this creates a narrative. It follows a theme through the materials within the archive. The idea is that it brings people in. It operates like a trailer. And as you get to each image, there's a little reference identifier in the top right-hand corner that gives you the location or the identification of that item as you go into the archive itself. Again, the idea is for it to be inclusive, to bring people in who've got a connection or who are just generally interested in this club, this phenomenon, and how they can, work with it themselves in terms of bringing their own memories to the surface. So I think that's probably as much as I want to say at this point. We'll come to a conclusion there by David's comment about working with the experimental ChatGPT assistant. Yes, it's proving useful for eliciting memories. Of course, it is putting a deliberately positive, nostalgic spin on the material it gets. There is concern in my mind about whether we're just kind of muddying the water between what can be historically verifiable through connection to a source and what is in that sort of fuzzy cloud of ChatGPT kind of taking material and reshaping it. And there's a particularly interesting moment there where it seemed to be kind of quite confidently ignorant at the moment it took the reference to bridge and turned it into bridge over troubled waters without any explanation or understanding of our understanding of what it was doing there or what it was referring to. So there we go. And if you want to know more about the project that this is also feeding into, which looks at ways, toolkit that music venue communities and managers and owners can develop ways of developing their digital archives based on their own resources, Our Place is the project where you can go for an explore of the different techniques that we're suggesting might be available and beneficial to people wanting to do, depending on their budget, low price or sort of a high price version, such as the one we've been working to now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. I'm going to dive straight into questions. That was a really fascinating presentation, and you have given me some things to think about some of our collections at Leicester, particularly around performance programs. So thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
I'll dive into the questions, and I might just bring a couple of them together to start with. So we've got a couple of questions from Shu. So the first is around how your ideal vision of how the archives can be used beyond academia, for example, supporting people's personal musical development. And then the second is around the possibilities for systematically collecting living experiences as they happen now. So we're sort of connecting really the archives to people's personal musical development to then capturing living experiences as they happen now. If you'd like to sort of comment on that, or if Victoria would like to come in as well, because I think Victoria has also joined us back on the panel.
Great. Victoria, do you want to go first, or shall I pick up that?
I feel, Rachel, as though you would be definitely the person to answer the first question about how people are going to use the archive or how you envision them using it for their own personal musical development. But then I may have some thoughts about the live collecting of like contemporary music experience in ephemera. So leave that one with me. But if you want to start with the first one.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, it's a very, very sort of broad level. I think what is happening with the shift to, or what has happened in the shift to streaming is a kind of decontextualization of the audio material that you access via that means. So often I think, tracks are very poorly labeled. You don't necessarily know if you're looking at a part of a work, or something, say an album of songs and only one song, you don't know if that's just a single that's a standalone or is part of something broader. So the sort of poor quality of metadata is very, I think, limiting and distorting in people sort of accessing and understanding and taking on board musical material that they're exploring, through their own kind of creativity, either as a listener or as a musician looking for new inspiration. So digital archives, I think, there's an absolutely, it's such along the lines that I've discussed there, is absolutely crucial, I think, in being able to reestablish some of that context and different contexts as well. I mean, we talked there about, those sort of traditional enforced narratives about, particular cities becoming more prominent and others at different times. But these other narratives, if you can track them through, if you can build these kind of connections and contextualization around, through links to other sources that inform our understanding of that music and where it came from. And we can never know the intentions of the musicians themselves, but certainly we can help to have a more informed speculation about what their intentions might have been. I think that is a potentially extremely rich set of possibilities. And, again, sort of music, do you consider it a standalone and it has no context, or context is not useful, we should just approach it as music? Or is it entirely a social cultural product, in which case that historical contextualization, that contextualization with other sources, ephemeral sources we haven't had access to in the past, those are really, really important. So I'd see that as really, really significant. And for a musician to be learning from this kind of sonic material, this audio material, and wanting to really get into it and understand it, I would argue, but then you might say I would, being a cultural historical musicologist, that part of that is knowing the people behind it and what they were experiencing on a day-to-day level, and what therefore we might start to understand as the effective content and connection with those people in a different time, place, and genre, and social groupings. I hope that's useful. Victoria.
Yeah, so I'll jump in and ask the second question from Shu about the possibilities for systematically collecting lived experience as it happens. I think there's quite a lot of potential avenues to discuss this. I think the first word I would pick up on there is systematically, because I think that in a way what we were doing, and I can speak mostly to the Willow Archive project, was not so much kind of a systematic collection as it was a collection that was being driven by the effective and social values of the people that were contributing to the archive. And so I think that if we were to create opportunities for the collection of live music experiences as they happen, then it would not be so much systematic as it would be selectively driven by the interests and experiences of the people who were making contributions to it. I think a systematic collection is, well, I think it's probably impossible, but at the same time, I wonder to what extent it is necessary or desirable. But instead, what we're trying to do is to capture what has meaning and importance to people as it's being produced. And I think what the Willow Project demonstrates is a kind of model for doing that, as it can happen and be driven both from within universities and within library contexts, but also by communities themselves and by music venues and music organisations too. So I don't think that there are possibilities for a systematic collection, but I think there are lots of opportunities to collect a much more diverse range of live music experiences through a kind of more participatory approach and a kind of acknowledgement of the emotional and social dimensions of that kind of collecting, that we're not just collecting for the knowledge and information that is contained in those sources, but we're also collecting in order to support people's memory and identity needs in local places. So hopefully that makes some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And then I'm going to link together another couple of questions, which are really all around sort of, well, linking together around long-term access, I suppose, to these resources. So the first one is about copyright and how you're navigating the complexities around copyright for the project. And then the second one is around the long-term life of the project beyond the fixed-term funding. So navigating the complexities around copyright is obviously essential for providing access. And then the second part of it is how will that continue beyond fixed-term funding?
Yeah, both great questions. The beauty of being able to work with the music societies in Huddersfield and Belfast and York is that they agreed with the initial application to make available their archival materials to help in the process of developing co-creatively the digital archive from their collections and working with their, the digitisation of their material. So there was an interesting issue actually around programme notes. Because often with these societies, there's the same person who has written the programme notes for some years. And so there was a moment there, I think it was really more about, well, is this, if we're just making this material available, might it be actually to our detriment? Might we be, people be able to sort of plunder this material for use in other contexts? We might be able to sort of generate some income from it, because like any music organisation, times have been difficult, and this was a sort of possibility that was thought about there. One of the things that we are thinking about, because this isn't publicly available at the moment, the Intermuse archive itself isn't publicly available at the moment, partly because we're still adding to it and working through the materials. We have been pretty systematic, as far as you can be systematic, in tracking down those British Music Society sources, as I would do in any kind of rich archival research project, regardless of the digital archive element to it. We will probably need to put a wall in place so people can certainly access the material, but can do so via, contact with us, and we can liaise with the societies. There would also, I think, be something rather helpful about asking people to commit to contributing some material if they do make use of the archive itself. In fact, one of the points that we made in the application was that the copyright issues themselves would become part of our research. What exactly are the implications here? How do we manage this? Because as we all know, I mean, the publication and the publishing scene has changed massively over the last few years, and things that we thought would never happen have happened, and other things remain resolutely obstinately out of reach. It'd be lovely to be able to connect, for example, with Grove dictionary entries and things like that. But the issue of the paywall there for a digital resource is not one that we've been able to resolve at this point. But who knows? Work is continuing on this. The other thing was legacy, wasn't it? Where does this go after the project? Yeah, I mean, the funding has finished, and so we're now working through various different publication options. We've published a lot through the Digital Libraries for Musicology conference, which is now free to access on AAM. And I think the purpose we're going to be sort of using articles from now is less on the sort of technical side of things, which we were very much focusing on to begin with, and now more on the interpretation of what we've been able to establish and how we're working with those materials within the context of the Greenstone archive. It is certainly going to be, it's hosted on our servers here at York. It's certainly going to be available. I plan to be able to publish something which has a sort of, maybe a kind of focused aspect or element of the digital library as an appendix, a kind of digital appendix. I think that would be very exciting. Obviously, lots to clear in terms of copyright there. But then you're kind of making something available that people can just go and explore themselves. And, you're so close. If you've got an article with links, you've got the digital library, you're so close, you can get right in there. You can start to move around the different sources and draw your own conclusions. And I find that very exciting.
I think just finally to add, Rachel did mention it, but with the Willow Digital Archive project, from very early on, we were in discussions with Explore York Libraries and Archives about the sort of ingest of the digital archive into their digital preservation framework, so that it would become part of the city's archive collections, and therefore be preserved and sustained there. Recognizing that, you know, that has really significant value to the local community, and is part of the memory of the city. So that kind of partnership, I think, has been really critical in thinking about the long-term future of that material.
Yeah, we've also done some creative schools workshops as well, drawing inspiration from the archive, which have just been amazingly exciting, actually. I thought they would be exciting, but they, you know, absolutely exceeded my expectations. And so we're developing free educational resources that other schools and other teachers can download and adapt to use in their own classroom settings. Yeah, so there's quite a lot still to come.